Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is our first video in our Unit 3 on challenging authority in Europe. And the topic of this video is absolute monarchs. We're going to be describing the characteristics of an absolute monarch. So I want to define some terms here real quick. If we say something's hereditary, it means you got it from your parents, right? You were born with it. Usually we're talking about biological things like, eye color or like what your hair is like or how tall you are. A monarch is a king or a queen who has complete power. So monarchy, king or queen with complete power. So a hereditary monarchy then is when a king or queen has complete power and they pass that power down to their kids when they die. So the king has a son, his oldest son becomes the new king when he dies. That's a hereditary monarchy. So during this time period in Europe, there are a lot of European monarchs who claim what we call divine right, which means they say that they are in charge because God wants it that way. And so for you to go against what they say is for you to go against God. These are all Christian rulers because it's Europe. And so they're saying that the Christian God has put them in charge and wants them to rule. And they use that to justify everything that they do. So the most famous example of an absolute monarch lived in France. France is highlighted here in red. This is Louis XIV of France. And these Roman numerals, X is the Roman numeral for 10, and then IV is the Roman numeral for 4. So XIV is Roman numerals for 14. So when you see that, it just means Louis XIV of France. And you can see he has an amazing hairstyle, an amazing fashion sense. I wish people still dressed like this. Maybe this will be my Halloween costume. I don't know. We'll have to see. Probably not. One of the things that Louis XIV of France is associated with is the construction of a large palace outside of Paris called Versailles. Not Versailles. Versailles. You can just say Versailles. That's fine. Just pretend the L's aren't there. The L's and the E and the S, they're not there. French is a language known for its many unpronounced letters. Palace of Versailles. And the Palace of Versailles was the largest, fanciest, most gold-plated, luxurious palace anybody had ever built. Cost over $2 billion to build the Palace of Versailles. It was so large. I am not making this up. It was so large that if you were a courtier at the palace, somebody who was like part of the king's court, and you were in the middle of the palace and you had to go to the bathroom, I didn't have indoor plumbing yet. So if you had to go to the bathroom, sometimes it could be like a mile to walk to get outside the palace. And so people would like go in the fireplace. True story. You thought history was boring. It's not. We've got fancy people peeing in fireplaces. Just to give you a sense of how much $1 billion is. So Versailles, over $2 billion. 1 billion equals 1,000 millions. I think this graphic does a pretty good job of showing you how big $1 billion is. There are only 700 people in the world today who are billionaires. There are 7 billion people, 700 of them are billionaires. That's absurd. Why does anybody need that much money? So Versailles was a symbol of power. By building this elaborate, incredibly expensive palace, it was a way for Louis XIV to show everybody what a big deal he was. And it also was sort of like entertaining to the people of France. Like the people of France were sort of like wanted to pay attention to what the king was doing. It was sort of like the keeping up with the Kardashians of the day. People were like diverted by it. They thought it was fascinating and entertaining. And they also thought like, okay, this is pretty cool that our king has this like incredibly fancy palace with people peeing in the fireplace. Louis XIV was often called the Sun King. The idea being that like everything revolved around him, that people only mattered when he shone his bright light on them. Another interesting and true story here is that it was during this time period that the cravat was invented. You can see a picture here of Louis XIV wearing a cravat. Cravat is the early predecessor of the necktie, the men's necktie that you see professionals wearing today. And true story, the reason why they started wearing the cravat was because they were trying to close off the top of the shirt because they smelled, they weren't bathing properly and they were kind of stinky and they were trying to keep the stink inside the shirt. I wish I could have this many great factoids to give you every lesson. All right, we're going to switch gears now. So we were in the green place of France. Now we're going to go to the world's largest land-based empire at the time, Russia. You can see how big Russia is. It's orange. You can notice, excuse me, that's just allergies. You can notice that it takes parts, it covers 2 continents. It starts in the west in Europe and goes all the way to the Pacific across Asia. Before we get there, I just want to quickly say, like, that's part of Russian history, is that they're both European but also Asian. And so, like, because of that, they oftentimes would feel kind of like less than the other European powers. Like, they didn't feel as good as France or England or Germany. Well, Germany isn't a thing yet, Prussia. So that connects to this guy, Peter the Great of Russia. Peter the Great. The ruler of Russia is called a czar. You can spell it either with a TS or with a CZ. Either way, czar comes from the old the Russian word the old Roman word Caesar. The Roman emperor was called the Caesar, and so the Russian ruler called himself a czar, which was like, you know, Caesar, czar. You get it? Anyway, Peter the Great was also an absolute monarch. And he was known for trying to modernize Russia. He created a new education system for the nobles. He modernized the army. He created new bureaucracy for the government to run more efficiently. And this was all called Westernization, adopting the culture and the technology of Western Europe. Peter thought that Western Europe was more advanced than Russia, and so he tried to make Russia as much like Western Europe as possible. One famous version of this was, during this time period, the nobles of Russia all had beards that they were very proud of and that were very important to them. And nobody in Western Europe had beards. So Peter the Great made them all shave their beards off. Why you gotta be like that, Peter? That's messed up. I like beards. Peter also built a large palace in the city of St. Petersburg. He moved the capital of Russia from Moscow, which you can see here, to St. Petersburg, which is closer to the rest of Europe. He moved further west. Westernization, guys, get it? And he built this large palace here in no small part because he had seen Versailles and he thought that it was like really impressive and cool, and he wanted to be like Louis XIV. So he's like, all right, I'm going to build a huge palace. And he got 40,000 serfs, which is like a peasant with no rights, like notch above slave, to build this elaborate palace, and lots of them died because they were working in the winter and it's Russia and it's cold. So really not that great a thing for you to do, Peter. Kind of messed up. Just saying. So some things that I hope you noticed, that these 2 absolutist, and I misspelled absolutist, oh God, but I'm not going to redo the video. Just pretend there's an S in there. What do absolutist monarchs have in common? Well, one, they claim that their right to rule comes from God. This is called the divine right of kings, and absolute monarchs claim that. They centralized power, which means they put all of the power in the country in one central place where they were, and then they ran the country from there. And they used different kinds of organizational processes, technologies, in order to set that up. You know, like they set up government officials, they set up roads, they set up all the things they needed to rule from a centralized capital. And then they have large building projects, which might sound silly, but like when you build a big palace or you build a big cathedral, or you like Versailles or St. Petersburg, you're saying something about your ability to make people build things for you and the amount of money that you're able to spend. It's a symbol of your power, and it's very impressive and makes people understand that you are absolutely in charge. See what I did there? Yeah, okay. So thanks for watching. Make sure that you answered the summary question, and I'll talk to you next time.